Hello, welcome to my latest video. It's the longer version of my, get it straight, Box Hill painting. The shorter version, which is time-lapse only, is already out, and if you prefer to watch that, just stop this video and go to the description and there'll be a link straight to that one. But if you're staying here and because you're curious about how I painted this, you're most welcome. And if you could like and subscribe if you haven't already, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy it. The first task is to get the reference photo down onto your panel, and there's many ways of doing this. I usually just print the reference photograph the 1:1 size, and as the printer can't go that big, it usually means having to taping the tiled prints together and then tracing it through with transfer paper, or just scribbling on the back of it and pushing it through that way. If it's a particularly simple scene, I'll just sketch it straight. But here, the scene is quite simple, but not simple enough. So I've decided to do the grid method. And that's where you draw grids on your reference photograph, scale the squares up and transfer those to your panel and use that as a guide to sketching. There's no good reason why I chose this method this time other than I hadn't done it for a very long time, so I thought I'd give it another go. The first painting task is to do the blocking. This is where you paint a simplified version of the whole scene. It might be tempting to not bother with this stage and go straight into painting for real, but it really is worthwhile. It helps you assess the overall colour scheme and to see where things are working or not working. It's very easy to move a tree a bit at this stage than after you've done all the fine detail. I've let the blocking stage dry thoroughly, and with the fast drying oils that's taken about 2 to 3 hours. So starting with the sky, as I always work from background to foreground, I'll mix up a colour that's close to the horizon and a colour that's higher in the sky, and I'll start painting from the horizon line and slowly mix in more of the upper colour as I go to get a smooth transition between the two. Now the sky graduation has finished, I've mixed up a darker blue with a little bit of burnt umber to grey it to act as the shadow colour for some clouds. I've also mixed a much lighter version of the sky colour, which is almost white, and with those two I will indicate some simple clouds just by putting the shadow colour on underneath, the highlight colour on top, and then using another brush, dry brush, to blend them together. A bit of a experiment here. I want to paint the distant landscape, which would be almost the same colour as the sky as it's so far away, and atmospheric perspective will make it very blue. The experiment is I need most of the horizon line to be perfectly flat and straight. There's some hills to the right hand side, so I don't need to bother about those, but the flat bit I don't want my paintbrush to wobble at all. So as you can see here, I'll put some masking tape down to make sure I don't wander into the sky at all. After finishing, I felt it was a little bit too defined. It needs to be a bit paler and, if possible, slightly blurrier. So what I've done is mixed up a pale blue wash. What I mean by wash is I've mixed a lot of white spirit in with the paint, and the underlying paint hasn't totally dried, so the solvent will work on it a little. So after washing over the whole area, it lightens it all up, plus that solvent will slightly attack the paint that's there and blur it a little. This only works if the paint's still a bit wet. It doesn't really attack dry paint at all. As I'm painting this far distance, I'm very mindful of the fact that as the land gets closer to the viewer, the colours are getting warmer, there's more contrast, and I'll pay a bit more attention to the details. I'll need to wait until the far distance has dried properly, but in the meantime, I can go over the foreground trees with a Rosemary's Tree and Texture brush and just use the darkest colour I can find in the reference photograph and carefully dab the brush all over to create a kind of texture, concentrating on the areas which will be darker in the final piece. Here I've picked out a colour that is just a little bit lighter than the darkest areas of the tree. I'm using that colour with a fine point brush to first go round the silhouette of the trees and pick out the shape the leaves make against the background. And then with the same colour, I'll speckle it all over the whole of the tree. Don't need to be too careful at this stage because the main part of the tree will have the lighter colours to define it better. After going over the whole tree with the first darker colour, I've let it dry to a sort of tacky state, and now I've added a little yellow and white to the mix, and we'll go over the whole tree again, starting to concentrate where the light's hitting the tree. And when that's finished, a bit more white, a bit more yellow, and go over again. Each time less and less of the tree gets painted on as you slowly hone into the lightest highlights. You can never be too sure how many layers it needs for a finished tree. You just keep assessing it, and if there's too big a jump from one colour to the next, you can try and fill the gap. But it's basically do a layer, stand back and assess it and see how much more it needs. The next two trees are a different species, some sort of pine, and with that the structure is quite different. There appears to be long branches going quite vertical. But I'm basically going to use the same technique, starting off dark and then slowly going lighter. It's just these trees are a bluer colour and generally darker overall, so just need to keep that in mind. Now onto the bushes at the base of the main trees. They are basically the same colour as the trees, but it's nice to have a slight variation, so when I mix the colours I don't try too hard to match what I've done before, and then I'll get a random variation. And on the smaller, further away trees on the left, I'll put in a slight variation there as well, but it's all basically the same mix. Some of the darker trees will have a little bit of burnt umber in there, whereas the lighter ones don't, where I'm using just French ultramarine and cadmium yellow light and a touch of titanium white, but all the trees are just slightly different percentage mixes of those colours. That's the main line of trees finished. There is one more tree, and that's an overhanging one that's going to go over the top left part of the painting. But before I do that, I'm going to take a dark green thinned with white spirits and put a texture in the grass area, and that will help establish some shadows in there before painting the grass properly. For this overhanging tree, I'm going to treat it in three stages. The first is the darkest leaves, which are in the background. I'll let those dry, and then I'll paint in all the branches and twigs. Let that dry, then I'll paint the leaves that are in the foreground, and they'll be the lightest coloured ones. Although none of the leaves in this overhanging tree are going to be very bright, they're all pretty dark, as it's nearly a silhouette. Nearly there. The only thing left to do is the foreground grass. I'm making a start with the grass by using a rake brush, and that's a brush that has two lengths of bristles, short and long. The longer bristles have gaps between them so that when you paint with it you get multiple lines. This can be very good for things like grass, but you do have to be careful as you can end up with a regular pattern which doesn't look natural at all. So I'm only going to use this brush very sparingly, then I'll get on to using a rigger to do the blades of grass, especially the longer ones, individually, which sounds like it would take forever, but you can actually get quite a speed up and it doesn't take that long at all. I think I've got enough grass in the foreground, so I'm calling it done. I could have spent a lot more time on the foreground grass and put lots of fine detail in there, but I really wanted the viewer's eye to go to the far distance, so I'm keeping the foreground grass relatively simple. I do hope you enjoyed watching. If you managed to watch the whole video, well done, quite a marathon. If you could hit that like and subscribe button and consider the notification bell so you won't miss a video, that would be greatly appreciated. And do check out the description where there's links to where you could buy prints of this painting and all the others I've done here. That would help the channel out massively. Thank you, and see you on the next video.